Coming up on this Veterans Day edition of the ICT Newscast, we look at the Choctaw Code Talkers from World War I and World War II. Plus, a new traveling exhibit explains the backstory behind the 1924 American Indian Citizenship Act.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The ICT Newscast is sponsored by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, a nonprofit organization serving American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. On the web at iltf.org.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Omidawahopah, I'm Aaliyah Chavez. Thank you for joining us on this special edition of the ICT Newscast. More than 25 tribes at various points in U.S. history have been used as warriors who were called code talkers. This worked in two ways. Sometimes it was the language carried by phone or over the radio, but more often it was a code within a code, speaking an indigenous language while using words that would make no sense to someone listening in. In World War I, the Choctaw Nation did just that. ICT's Mark Trahant talks to Judy Allen. She is the Historic Projects Officer for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Judy. I'm really intrigued with the whole story of the Choctaw Code Talkers. Maybe start with that.
Well, the Choctaw Code Talkers were in World War I and in World War II, and they weren't the only tribe that used their native language as a code to fool the enemy, but the Choctaws are the most widely documented of the World War I tribes.
We think, one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview and the show was so much of Veterans Day has become about current veterans, which is really important. But the roots of the day are also Armistice Day and Remembrance Day. And this particularly fits into that story of those two events.
Choctaw Code Talkers and the other Native American tribal members from other tribes who were willing to use their language to help defeat an enemy were especially valiant, considering the fact that a lot of them had been in government boarding schools, had been forced to speak only English, literally had their language beaten out of them. So for them to be overseas fighting for their country, they were newly citizens of, and then be willing to use that language they had been told by their same government, do not use your Choctaw language, but they were willing to use it to talk on the telephone, to transmit messages. And these were the first messages, apparently, that were not deciphered by the enemy.
I'm struck by the communications you sent me with the military, who talked about how important this was. Yet after World War I, the boarding schools stayed on the same path of trying to erase the language. You'd think there would be a course correction at that point.
Even in the Bible, it talks about the children of Israel who wandered 40 years because they couldn't course correct themselves. So I guess people just have an inherent ability to be stubborn and remain on our path. Hopefully we are learning now. It has taken a long time, but our language is celebrated not only by these military quests, but by the culture of our tribe. We've begun schools to teach the language that have thousands of students. They are in public schools and university and available on the internet and in communities. So we're taking our first language speakers and creating second language speakers who are spreading our language, and we even teach it here at work.
Early in World War I know this came later in World War I, but what were some of the pressures going on to get people into the theater and to actually try some of this?
I'm sure you realize that the war started in 1914, but the United States did not join the effort until 1917. Our Code Talkers were sent over in 1918. just shortly before the end of the war, but our efforts were integral to the successful end of the war. Before that, the Native Americans in Oklahoma, the Choctaws, Cherokees, Creeks, etc., we were already citizens of the United States thanks to the Dawes Allotment Act, the Snyder Act, and statehood, all three of which provided paths to citizenship. So they were up for basically the draft like anyone else would have been. They were requested to enlist like any other citizen.
Was there an immediate thought to use their services as code talkers, or was that something that bubbled up?
There was not an immediate thought upon getting the World War I Native Americans to join to use them as code talkers. It was a problem that with communications on the front that led to this thought. All of the German interceptions of our messages were being deciphered by the Germans. For example, if we were moving troops, the German army knew it and they could bomb that area. If we had a supply dump or ammunition dump, the Germans could bomb it, because if we talked about it on the phone or radio, they were interpreting our communications and knew every move we made. We couldn't even move wounded personnel without them knowing it.
Well, and the communications from the military, again, make that point really strongly, that the Germans were just really good at intercepting communications. And what's so amazing about the Code Talker story is that this was all on the open phone lines where they could listen anyway.
That is right. While other Native American tribes used their language at times in World War I to transmit messages that were difficult to decipher, the Choctaws were the first ones to actually create coded words within our own language. So there's two different types of code talking from World War I. One, that simply the language was used to transmit messages. And two, the way the Choctaws did it, we not only used our language, we found words within our language that would fit a military term. Like we used tonapachito, which is little gun shoots fast, and that was a machine gun. So we created a whole list of terms like that and quickly in the field and started using those. And it was doubly difficult then for the so-called masters of communication, the Germans, to decipher.
The one that struck me, and I think it'd be just mind-numbing for a German spy, would be the communication for battalions.
Oh, yes, we used 1 grain of corn, 2 grain of corn, and 3 grain of corn for our battalions. Yes, so that was, we just had a lot of ideas. These men were very creative and on the fly. And I'm very proud, and the entire Choctaw Nation is very proud of what our men did. In fact, one of our code talkers testified later that a captured German officer asked during his interrogation, who was on the phones? And the only answer he received was, it was Americans on the phone.
What's been the reception particularly in the tribal community, but also in the region?
Most of the communities, when they first returned, did not know that these men had used their language to help defeat the enemy. Some people thought maybe it was classified, but evidence just seems to go more toward these Choctaw soldiers being very humble, not wanting to talk about their heroics. They came back and went back to their ordinary lives in church and at home and fishing, hunting, being with their families. They pretty much left the military behind when they got home.
The young people today, is this story part of the community culture?
It is widely taught in schools in our Choctaw Nation. We even use some of our human resources training with this story because it depicts our cultural values of faith, family, and culture, because they had faith to use their culture to protect their family.
And also, I'm really intrigued how the highway came about, and maybe tell that story.
We actually have highway signs between the towns of Antlers and Broken Bow, one on that is designated the Choctaw Code Talkers Highway. And this is something that the Oklahoma State Legislature approved and purchased road signs, so that 43 miles of highway, along which many of our code talkers lived during the early 1900s. This stretch of highway has that significant signs so that any passersby will see that this is our area dedicated to code talkers. And if they don't know what they are, maybe they'll check it out. We also have 2 large black granite monuments, about 6 foot each, and they tell the story of our code talkers at each end of this highway.
Are there particular stories from the young men that went over there that are worth knowing?
One of the men that was from the Colgate area. His name was Otis Leader. He was part Choctaw, part Chickasaw. And he says that he did code talking at a different time than the 142nd. Otis was in the 1st Division, but his story is unique because he was a little bit older. He was in his early 30s, and he was working on a ranch. He and his boss went to Fort Worth from Oklahoma to buy cattle. When they got on the train to get back to Colgate, someone reported that they had seen this tall, dark man and another guy that didn't speak good English, and they must be German spies. So phone calls were made ahead to where the train was supposed to stop in Oklahoma. But the sheriff there knew Otis Leader and his boss, the owner of the ranch. And so when Otis Leader found out this story, he was so appalled that he went to the nearest recruiting station, signed up to join the Army, left his 2 little girls with his mother, and was in some of the first battles.
Let me ask you about World War II and how the Choctaw Code Talkers took up that cause again.
Well, we don't have a lot of stories from those men. Again, they were very humble. One of them was killed in action. He didn't get to see his little girl here in Oklahoma. Another was killed in action, and he is still buried in France. His family still visits his gravesite in France about every year. And then we had 2 other code talkers of World War II. One went into church services as minister, etc. And the other was an humble man that lived up near McAllister. And those names are Slish Billy and Forston Baker that did return home, and Andrew Perry and Davis Pickens, who were killed overseas.
When you think about this holiday and the commemorations going on, what's important for people to know about this whole history?
That the tribes have a lot of people who are willing to serve, and we've had people who are willing to serve in every conflict. We have unique talents like anyone else, and we're willing to use those unique talents to protect our country. The actual seal of the Choctaw Nation is a pipe hatchet with 3 arrows and a bow, and those 3 arrows represent the old districts of the Choctaw Nation, so it represents all of our people. The bow is not actually strung. It is called an unstrung bow, and that is to symbolize that while we are naturally a peaceful people, we are always ready at a moment's notice to go to war to protect our people.
I want to end by asking you back again about voting rights. And even though the Choctaw were among the tribes of the Dawes Act and so had citizenship, when just a couple of years after World War I was the push for the Indian Citizenship Act.
We understand that the Native American success in World War I led to the United States approving citizenship rights for all Native Americans. The people in Oklahoma who were Native American were citizens, but there were thousands of people who were not in other parts of the United States. This did not automatically give everyone voting rights, though.
In fact, the Citizenship Act is interesting because so many folks, just the military was writing, even in World War I, how difficult it was to figure out whether somebody was eligible to serve or not.
And that's part of what the Army reorganization hearings in 1919 in the 66th Congress discussed as if they had an honorable discharge, should they automatically be a citizen? Should they be eligible for other rights? And things of that nature. So people can get online and look for those reorganizational hearings and read a lot more about that in detail.
Well, Judy Allen, this is fascinating. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to help share the story of our Choctaw Code Talkers.
An exhibit at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum gives a unique perspective into World War II through the eyes of a Pawnee warrior. Brummett Echo Hawk served in the 45th Infantry Division, mostly Oklahoma Native Americans known as the Thunderbirds.
It tells a story, it tells an incredibly powerful story of the Indians who served in World War II, many of them with the 45th, 2 Medal of Honor recipients, Native Americans from the 45th. And it's nice, it's nice to think my grandfather knew them, and he was one of them and served valiantly.
This exhibit is called Nations at War, and it is an exhibit documenting the field sketches and the history of Brummett Echo Hawk's experience in World War II as a member of the 45th Infantry Division. And what makes this so unique and so just amazing is the fact that he sketched his experiences in war, and it's something that we've never documented before, and we haven't seen anything like it. And coming from an Oklahoman, coming from a Pawnee, and he really is a historian in that he documents a lot of these sketches, he says who's there, and he describes these scenes that you see in the exhibit. And more than that, he puts himself in an historical context, in his place in history, in Pawnee history, but also as a soldier, and then later as an artist.
The drawings themselves as documents of the Italian campaign in World War II. Typically, Italian campaign isn't much discussed in World War II. And the 45th Division, Brummett Echo Hawk in particular, documents this important history. And in terms of historical memory, also for the Italians who don't know much about the history of the 45th, and we currently have an exhibit going on simultaneously of the copies of these images at the Operation Avalanche Museum in Eboli, the province of Salerno. And they're fascinated to learn about this Native American history, the landing, their role in the liberation of the Italian peninsula.
I went to Italy in September to what is called the Operation Avalanche Museum in that small town of Eboli on the 80th anniversary of the Allies landing in Italy. And we're very proud as a family and a tribe that my Uncle Brummett was part of the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds.
This is my grandfather, Phil Gover, and his Pawnee name is Uktarut Lesharu, means shield chief. He was a soldier in the 45th Infantry in World War II. As you can see, he's lost an arm, and he lost it at Venafro in Italy, fighting with the 45th.
He's talking about Pawnee warrior traditions, and he has some amazing quotes that go alongside that instead of a headdress, I carry a helmet. Instead of a bow and arrow, I use an M1, and I will write and draw a battle as I see it, as I lived it. And that's what these drawings do, is they show his experiences firsthand, and are just an amazing primary resource.
Younger generations don't even know about World War II. I mean, we think about war so differently now, and we see war on television. But there was a time when we sent people to war to liberate others. And it feels like that's not what we do anymore. So it's just very powerful.
Nations at War, field sketches of a Pawnee warrior at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, is on display until January 21st. The nation's lawyers and the Library of Congress have a new traveling exhibit that explains the history of Native American voting rights. ICT's Mark Trahant has more.
Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really excited to learn about this exhibit. Maybe start by telling us about it.
Well, I've been involved because I'm the chair of the Standing Committee on the Law Library of Congress. And over recent years, one of the many things that we do, and that's a great institution, is we've been preparing traveling exhibits for the purpose of enhancing public or civic education about major issues, and we've been focusing on people's rights, how the law it upholds and advances their rights. And so we've done the Magna Carta, celebrated that anniversary, the 800th a few years ago, the anniversary of the women's right to vote in the 19th Amendment. And then last year, we had a very successful history of cooperation, voluntary civic engagement since the Mayflower Compact. So this year, with the upcoming anniversary of the Citizenship Act of 1924, with that 100th anniversary coming up, and because the first ever Native American president of the American Bar Association, Mary Smith, is at the helm, we thought it would be appropriate to focus on the long history of Native Americans and indigenous people in the Americas, Alaska, Hawaii, pursuing voting rights, which predated the Citizenship Right, in which the Citizenship Act apparently didn't fix at all, and the struggle continues. So that was where this came from. And I'll tell you some interesting things, Mark. We've been working on these exhibits, and they're extremely popular. They go around the United States. They go into courthouses, schools, libraries, public venues, senior citizen organizations, and so on. But I've never been involved in one that there has been so much intense interest and excitement over as this one. So the content, there's 8 panels. It's very mobile. You put it up, and there's some dense content with images and artifacts and photos and things. But there's about 8 panels in this, and the amount of effort and engagement by lawyers who either themselves are Native Americans or they're involved in tribal law around the United States, the amount of staff people, American Bar Association, that had something to say and had very strong feelings and contributed, and also educated many of us about the complexities of issues. It was really a work of, I don't think it's too strong to say passion to develop this. And I'm very excited that this is coming out. The reception has been phenomenal. It's not very expensive, to have this go around. And universities, my university, Jacksonville University in Florida, has acquired one. So we're not only going to be able to show it in public spaces, we're going to own it and keep it. And this is, a heritage month for Native Americans. And so there's 6 places already this month around the United States that are, including Jacksonville, that are showing this as part of a larger observance of the history of Native Americans. So it's a big deal, but the response has been more than we could have hoped for. And I'm very proud that we're able to do this. And there are many people at different universities, at Notre Dame, ASU, New Mexico, University of New Mexico, where they have fantastic tribal law scholars and teachers. And then there's practitioners throughout the United States who are in this field. But this exhibit helps the public begin a conversation, because it's not going to teach you everything, but to say, well, this is a piece of this very long struggle and history, and it raises the question, what can we do? How can we do better moving forward? And isn't it time? So I think I'm very hopeful that this is a time, and if you will, if you give this expression, the exhibit helps throw the blanket back on a long hidden, not hidden because the people that are enduring it are very aware of it, but to sort of public view, and it can help prioritize addressing these very important issues to very deserving people. So I'm hopeful. You know, I'm not naive, but I'm an optimist.
Well, one part of that story that I think shows the complexity is that if you read the military journals from World War I, it was clear that they were very confused about how they could even recruit Native Americans because they weren't sure they were citizens. And some of the early efforts were the 5 civilized tribes because they had citizenship clearly established. But other tribes, they felt they couldn't serve in the military.
Yeah, and what a loss for the military, really. There's a lot that's right in this country, but there's a lot that needs to be a lot better. And we've got to work on it.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.